Because I'm just sitting there, reading all my Resident Evil novels for Halloween, and I'm just I don't really remember this, because it's been so long since I've read, like, the whole series, but they say, as swear words, Jesus Christ, and so on, so much. And I'm just like, as a religious person, I'm not okay with saying those as swears. And, it just hit me. I'm like, start substituting things.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, every time I come to that, I'm just going to start thinking other words instead. And it just became so funny sometimes. Because Chris would be swearing because he's being attacked by a hunter or something. And so then it became like, banana pudding, they're going to kill me or something. And I'm just like, man, I wish I'd thought of this sooner. Have you read the novelizations?
No.
There are some serious mistakes in there in regards to grammar. I found a missing word, and I'm like, man, some of these are better than others when it comes to grammar.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I think a lot of them tend to kind of phone it in with series tie-ins, and so most of the time I would imagine that if something is particularly well done, it's probably because the author themselves did a good job with like the editing and the spelling and whatnot. I mean, I may be wrong, but that seems to be my experience too. Like usually the best times where I've had things turn out the best is when I've had to engage the editor the least.
Mm-hmm.
Even like some of the best editors I've ever had, it's typically just way better if I get things right when I can.
Yeah. But I've just like really noticed how, like, the first book was acceptable, except that it's like the author kind of forgot Chris and Rebecca were a thing. And so they're just kind of tacked on there and like, oh yeah, I should advance them to eventually get to the end goal of being saved by the helicopter and fighting the tyrant. And the second book was not really all that good, which was Resident Evil 2.
Mm-hmm.
It's really like now granted it's been a couple of months, so my feelings are a little fuzzy now because I don't really remember my initial opinion. But it's just like we were, going from one plot point to the next without really giving anybody character,
Yeah.
Like especially Leon, who should have some of the most developed character in the story, aside from Claire and her relationship with Sherry. Leon just, depending on what the scenario calls for, is apparently just easily swayed by this woman he randomly met.
Yeah.
And sometimes he's like, no, I'm a badass dude, or, Ada, wait! And I'm like, he sort of was like that in the game, but he didn't have much dialogue unless it was a cutscene that required him to speak or say something.
Well, he also got some good motivation and foundation built initially when he was, arriving for duty and he found, some of the other officers that had been attacked by the zombies and whatnot. It's something that gave him a lot of definition there at the beginning, and then he was trying to help Ada, in part, I think, because he wanted to live up to that sense of duty that he had, and he was kind of, he was kind of dorky in that game, but he was genuinely likable because he had a lot of reason for doing the things that he was doing. So if you take away that motivation, he just becomes as kind of flat and cardboard.
Well, basically what the book boiled him down to is that he realized Ada was not on the level, but he'd be tricked by her anyway. And I'm like, look, you can't have Leon realize the first encounter that she's fishy, and yet he still does, is kind of that dork with her.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that does not work. And then the whole thing with Claire, because of things going on that Claire is eventually going to meet up with Sherry and has to convince Sherry to stay with her instead of running off, like she does a lot in the game. And Sherry is very determined to stay on her own. I mean, there's really no reason for her to go with Claire, except that she just suddenly decides to right then. She's like, she's gonna go with Claire and stay with her from then on in. And I'm just like, dude, what the crap? And also the problem I have with, I mean, I guess it's supposed to show that Claire is a very caring, motherly kind of person. But she just immediately, without explanation, attaches herself to Sherry. Like, as soon as she knows that there's a child there, she's like, I have to be with her! Like, this isn't somebody I know or really grew up with or anything, or, like my niece or something. I'm just immediately inseparable from this child. Which, maybe some people would be because they'd feel that kind of tug of their emotions or that protectiveness would come out. But it doesn't really, it's not a thing with Claire. She's just suddenly, that's how it is, no explanation or no thinking about it. It's just, and I'm just like, I would kind of like maybe like a mention or something that Claire thinks about, I just kind of decided to do this all of a sudden, despite the whole fact that it's a survival situation, and most people would have just said, fuck this noise, and left.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I still don't know why Sherry isn't given a fucking gun. I'm like, just give her a handgun at least. Just in case something happens and she's not with you.
Or at least a knife or something, She needs some way to defend herself, not just run away, because she's going to get eaten.
Which is why, now I don't really follow this show, but I saw a glimpse of it like a few days or weeks ago. The Walking Dead happened to be on. And the first scene I saw was this guy, basically they're trying to find shelter. And so they decide that they're going to stay in this house, but of course they have to sweep it, make sure like any zombies that are in there are dead. So that, that they're safe, and then they can fortify it and stay there and spend some time to resupply and rest. And they have this kid with them. And thank you God, this kid has a gun, and he's probably like 12 or something. I'm like, thank you. He's trained how to use it, he knows he needs to use it, and he's being responsible with it, not some dumb fuck. I'm like, thank you. A kid with a gun who can protect themselves, instead of people being whiny little assholes about it. Because if I was 12, I'd be like, give me a gun. I'm not confident with it, and I'm probably unsure how to use it, but if it's between me and a zombie coming at me, I would prefer to have a gun to shoot in its face.
Yeah, especially if it's in a zombie situation. Like, it just seems something like that would just be stupid because you've got this kid there, and you don't want to be constantly bothered having to worry about protecting yourself and them all the time.
Yeah.
You want them to be able to protect themselves if you have to look away or do something else, or, something else has to take your attention for a moment. You can't always be looking at them.
But I've always had an issue with that in games. I'm just like, just give the kid a gun. Like Ashley in Resident Evil 4. Give her a fucking gun.
Yeah.
Like, look how many times she gets kidnapped and shit. That wouldn't happen if you took a few minutes to teach her how to use a gun. And then give her some ammo and say, watch your back and watch mine and don't fucking shoot me. But see, we're rational. We think about these.
Yeah, that's true.
But that was kind of my problems with the second novelization. And it just seemed like it, was just plodding through the plot, especially with Leon, because Ada happened to have all the keys for some reason. She had maybe not all of them, but most of them. She just happened to have them because of the way the books work with her undercover stuff. Because she was actually working for Trent, according to the novelization, when she was in Raccoon City.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just seemed like something was lost because they didn't do any puzzles hardly whatsoever. Or they weren't required to, or most of the puzzles were finished for them. And I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, at least the first book, they solved some puzzles. They didn't solve all the puzzles, but they actually had to be involved in at least some of them and figure them out. In the third book, I liked it, but the author has this weird thing where she has one character be all about, like, tapping that ass. And in the first book, it was Wesker for some reason, who had this huge hang up about, like, he encountered this one woman who was still alive in the labs, and apparently he thought she was so much of a hotty-totty bitch. You know, basically he had this superior complex about him, which it kind of works for Wesker, but the way it was portrayed, it kind of didn't work. And so he just kills her because apparently she stood him up once. And he thought about tapping her again, then he's like, nah, I'll just kill her. I can worry. And so it's just kind of part of his character where he's like just kind of thinking about sex and wanting to have sex. And I'm just like, what the crap? Whatever. And so that was the thing. In the second book, of course, it was Chief Irons, because, you know, that at least that makes sense, because, you know, you find out he's been accused twice of rape. And in the third book, it was Nikolai. And I'm just like, I'm pretty sure Nikolai did not have a boner the entire time he's running around Raccoon City, unless he's thinking about his money that he's going to make once he gets the hell out. And then there's that one point at the end of the book, and I'm just like, nobody, no matter how much of a sexual predator they are, they would not do this. You know how, like, at the end of 3, when you have the missile attack.
Yeah.
Nikolai is, they changed it a little bit to where Nikolai is fighting Jill in, like, hand-to-hand combat with guns and stuff. Basically, he has the advantage over her. Jill looks up and sees in his face, like, you know, that kind of face where basically he's decided that he's got enough time, despite a nuclear missile heading right at them, he's going to rape her and then kill her, and that way he can collect his bounty. And then Nemesis conveniently shows up and then decapitates Nikolai. And I'm just like, seriously, author? Really? Code Veronica didn't have that kind of crap. There was just a slight insertion into that story about how Alfred felt for his sister. Very minor, but suggested incest, though Alfred tried to downplay it in his inner monologue, or his inner narration. And the biggest problem I have with the novelization of Code Veronica is basically when we're supposed to switch to Chris. Yeah, we've been with Claire and Steve this whole time, and now we're switching to Chris. And basically, we make Veronica, or Alexia, basically God. So that Chris doesn't do anything once he gets to the island, with the exception of fighting the Gulf Worm, if I recall correctly. Alexia just, like, uses her telekinesis on Chris and Wesker and summon them to Antarctica. They don't have to fight any monsters or solve puzzles or anything. They just, you know, are guided by her telepathically to where she is, and then she makes her big showdown, and then Chris rescues Claire, and then they have to go do the thing with Steve, and then they have to fight Veronica, and then and I'm just like, really? That is the most upsetting, disappointing thing about this book, is that we do nothing with Chris. We don't involve his storyline at all. He magic MacGuffins there to defeat the final boss, and that's it.
That's so sad, because, like, I don't think I ever played completely through that game, but he was an important part of it.
He was, because that's when everybody's like, oh my god, Chris Redfield's in this game, holy shit!
Yeah, that's just bizarre to me, because I know, like, even though I didn't play through it completely myself, it's the favorite game of one of my friends, and so he has ever since the beginning. I knew how it went, so
It's Resident Evil 3, followed insanely closely by Code Veronica, followed by the previous 1, 2. I also like Remake a lot, but I just kind of like, it's Remake. It's not,
yeah,
I mean, it's good and it's interesting, but I just don't include it when I'm talking about my favorites of the games. And I guess followed by 4, because, at the bottom of the barrel, if I'm ranking them of my favorites, which 4 really isn't a favorite of mine.
yeah,
Followed by, I guess, 6, and then 5, because 5 didn't feel like a Resident Evil game at all. And 6 seemed like they were trying, but too hard in places to cater to everybody.
yeah. 4 really killed most of my interest in the series. Honestly, I loved 3 so much, and I liked Code Veronica. I never did get to play it through, as I said, but I still enjoyed it. It was not a fault of the game that I didn't get to play it through. It was basically just that things kept coming up, and I never got to finish playing through it.
Well, one day we should do that as a Let's Play together.
That might be actually really fun because I
I just don't
never
know where
have.
my copy is. Like, all of my Resident Evil copies have mysteriously vanished.
I want to say I have one somewhere, but I may not. I may be misremembering that. I don't
Well, we
know.
can probably buy it on Steam if it's not too much money. I just hate to buy another copy, because I
Hmm,
know I own copies of them. I just don't know
yeah,
where they are. I mean, I guess we could always emulate them, but there's usually something wrong with the health detection. So, like,
yeah,
if the character's running around, they won't limp or anything if they're in caution or danger.
yeah.